Somebody, I guess, put them away. See if you could share. If you Chelach of Aleph, page 100. Okay, yesterday we started a Sichah that when it says in this week's Parsha, Perek Yutes, B'Chedesh HaShlishi, it was on the third month when the Yidden left Mitzrayim, they came to Har Sinai, and as Chazal learned out, that was Rosh Chodesh, they came Rosh Chodesh Sivan, and the pasuk says, Vayisum Refidim, they traveled from Refidim, Vayavo Midbar Sinai, they came to the desert of Sinai, Vayachanu Bamidbar, and they encamped in the desert. And then the pasuk says, Vayichan Sham Yisro Neged Ahar, and the Yidden encamped opposite the mountain. So we brought down that Rashi says, Vayichan ki ish echad b'leiv echad, like one person with one heart. Al vashar kol achaniyos b'tarumus machlekes. The other encampments were all done with strife and machlekes. And we explained that what compelled Rashi to say that it was ki ish echad b'leiv echad, because the pasuk in the beginning uses vayachanu b'midbar lashon nabim, and then he uses an expression of vayichan lashon yachid. So it must be like the Mechilta that it was ki ish echad b'leiv echad. Then the Rebbe asked, based on this, if the diuk of Rashi is from Vayichan, so why bring Sham Yisro? So the Rebbe explained that Sham makes sense because to tell us that Dafka only over there it was Achdus, but everywhere else was Tarumas and Machlekes. However, why does Rashi quote the word Yisro? That was the last thing we got left off. So now the Rebbe says, seemingly you could say, as Rashi's hechrich is nit azay von dem Lashon Vayichan for sich, that Rashi's not forced to say because of the singular expression Vayichan, nor for them shina in them pasuk gufa. It's because the way that the pasuk changes right away. Frier steht in pasuk Vayachanu b'midbar Lashon Rabim. In the beginning, the pasuk says, as we just read, Vayachanu, and they camped in a plural sense. And then afterwards, immediately the Torah uses an expression of singular. Von dem was in ein hemshach hakosuf is the Torah mishana von vayachnu zu vayichan is muchach as neged ahar zan ze given ki ish echad b'leiv echad. From the fact that the Torah switches, you got the place? From vayachanu to vayichan in the middle of the pasuk, that demonstrates that they were opposite the mountain. That when they were opposite the mountain, they were as one man and one heart. So the Rebbe says, we need to understand. As in demselben Pasuk, we find multiple places in the Torah, in the same narrative, that the Jewish people are referred to in both forms, side the plural and side the singular, Lashon Rab, Lashon Yachid. And the Rebbe gives an example. Like we find later in our parsha, the pasuk says Vayar ha'om vayanu. It says the people saw Vayar and Vayanu, and they trembled. Und euch in der Friedike Sedra, also in the previous Sedra, it says Vayar Yisrael Yod Agdela. The Yidden Vayar Lashon Yachid saw the great hand, and Vayidu ha'om, and the people feared Vayaminu, and they believed. So we see, Sai in the parsha later on, Sai in the previous parsha, we see in the same pasuk, you can have a lashon of singular and plural, and it's referring to the Yidden. So what's bothering Rashi? You're saying in the same pasuk it says Vayachanu and then Vayichan. Okay, I have that many times. Why are you so forced to say the Vayichan? Because it changes in the same pasuk Vayichan lashon Yachid that was ki ish echad b'leiv echad. Now we're going to discuss in Gimel, we're going to see different nuances between Rashi and the Mechilta. Even though the Rebbe quoted the Mechilta as a base for Rashi, we're going to see different, Rashi's changes some words around. So he says in Gimel, Euch darf man verstehen, we also need to clarify. The Mocker from Peter Rashi bepashtis is from Mechilta. The source of Rashi is in the Mechilta. But the Lashon Mechilta is, what does the Mechilta say? Every time the Torah says that they traveled, and they, by either the expression by Yisro or vayachnu, they traveled and they encamped. So that's noisim b'machleikis, v'chenim b'machleikis. So they were traveling with strife and they encamped with strife. Aval kan hushvu kulam leiv echad. But over here, they were all equal with one heart. Kach nemer, therefore the Torah says, vayichan sham Yisro neged har, that the Yidden encamped opposite the mountain. So let's dissect now the Mechilta verse Rashi. From the Shinuyim tzishin Lashon Rashi and Lashon Mechilta, from the differences between Rashi and the Mechilta, number one, Aleph. In Mechilta state, Kan hushvu kulam leiv echad. In the Mechilta it says, here they were all equal with one heart. And Rashi is mefaret, whereas Rashi says, Ki ish echad, as one man, b'leiv echad, with one heart. So even though seemingly, ostensibly, they look, it seems the same, but if you're Medayik, he says, Kan hushvu, here they're equal with one heart. And Rashi says, as one man with one heart. We have to understand what's the difference between those two things. Base. In Mechilta state, noisim chuli v'choinim b'machleikis. In the Mechilta it says they traveled and they encamped with strife. When Rashi stein tzveilashenis. Rashi doesn't say machleikis twice. Rashi says he's medayik beta'aremis, which means with complaints, umachleikis, and with strife. Gimel. In Mechilta firtzach lakach nemar vayichan shem Yisro neged har. And Mechilta concludes, therefore it says that Yidden encamped there opposite the mountain. Or Rashi stellt sich nor auf vayichan shem Yisro in matik neged har. And Rashi, when he quotes this, he does not quote the words opposite the mountain. If you look in Rashi, Rashi says only vayichan shem Yisro. He doesn't quote, doesn't focus on neged har. So that's the three differences. Number one, Mechilta says, Kan hushvu, here they were all equal with one heart. Rashi says, Ki ish echad b'leiv echad, with one man with one heart. Mechilta says they traveled with machlekes, and they traveled and they encamped with machlekes. Rashi gives two descriptions, complaint and strife. And number three, and Mechilta concludes with neged har, and Rashi doesn't quote the neged har. In Daled, we're going to explain one more question on Rashi. Daled. We have to understand. Demselben Tegen von Rashi führt da, aber b'shinuyim gefinden b'pirushei in der Friedike Sedra. In Rashi's commentary on the previous Sedra, we find an interpretation that is substantially the same as Rashi's interpretation here, but there's also a few differences. And he explains, from the pasuk Vayisu bnei Yisrael seineim v'hinim Mitzrayim neisei achareim, on the pasuk that says in last week's parsha, the Yidden raised their eyes, and behold, Egypt, Mitzrayim, Noiseya, was chasing Acharim after them. Zetmen as dort is Rashi nit matik oich dem Wort Mitzrayim Noiseya Acharim. Sorry, I skipped. Is Rashi matik the Wort Noiseya Acharim? Rashi quotes the words, they traveled, the Egyptians were traveling, chasing them, after them. On his Mefarish, and he explains, Belev Echad, Ki Ish Echad. And he explains that the Mitzrayim were with one heart, as one man. Zetmen as dort is Rashi nit matik oich dem Wort Mitzrayim neisei achareim. Over there, Rashi does not quote the words Mitzrayim neisei achareim. Nit vi pirushei kan is yo matik dem Wort Yisro. Now, when he speaks about the Yidden vayichan sham Yisro, why does it say singular? He quotes the word Yisro. Yet Rashi in last week's parsha, when he explains v'hinim vayisum bnei Yisrael seineim v'hinim Mitzrayim neisei achareim. So what's bothering Rashi? It says Mitzrayim, which is Egypt, Noiseya Loshen Yochid, Achareim Loshen Nabim. Or not so much Achareim. Achareim is after the Yidden, but it says Mitzrayim is Egypt, Noiseya is Loshen Yochid. Noiseya, it should say in Mehina Mitzrayim, Noisim Achareim. What does it say Noiseya, traveling after them? So Rashi is bothered by that. So Rashi says, you know what Noiseya Loshen Yochid means? Belev echad ki ish echad. They had one heart, like with one heart as one man. And Rashi does not quote the word Mitzrayim. And he has the same question as he has in this week's parsha about Vayichan Sham Yisrael. Why is Vayichan Lashon Yachid? And the pashas, and now what's the reason? The Tambe Pashas Canal Valdas is soisin im diak von Neisei Lashon Yachid, like we explained in Aleph, because by bringing the word Mitzrayim, Neisei Achareim, you're contradicting Lashon Yachid. Because it's possible to say that when we speak about a nation, you could use a singular term, a singular form as Right. No, but the point is that when we speak about a nation of Israel, you could use a lashon yachid, and that's what the Rabbi asked. By saying the word Yisro, Vayichan Sham, I understand. By saying Yisro, you're basically hurting your pshat ki ish echad b'lev echad, because it makes sense that even when we're speaking about Yisro, you could use lashon of yachid, as we proved in Aleph. So now the Rebbe says that the same question you can ask, that we see that Rashi over there doesn't quote the word Mitzrayim Nesecharim. So he says, now, stellt sich aber dort die Mishaila. However, the following question arises. Aleph, in Pasuk steht doch Mitzrayim Nesecharim. In the Pasuk, it does say that the Egyptians was chasing them. Is doch Seiser Diakal Rashi. So the Chayr, this contradicts, this undermines the validity of Rashi. Why? Rashi says, B'leiv echad, ki ish echad, with one heart as one man. Okay, Beis, was is Rashi matik oichtem vort acharem? Why does Rashi also quote the word after them? And Gimel, Pipirushi Kam, Pipashasenu, is there say that ki ish echad, B'leiv echad, and in this interpretation, Rashi says as one man with one heart, whereas over there he says B'leiv echad ki ish echad, whereas there it says with one heart as one man. Okay, now in 5, he's going to explain a beautiful explanation. He's going to explain the difference between actions versus feeling. In grammar, when you have an action, you could use one phrase, and when you have a feeling, you have to use a different phrase. And he's going to explain what that means. Hey, the bir b'chol zeh, what's the explanation? Das was benegei Rabbim oder a ganze Volk wird lefamim genutzt lashon Rabbim and amol lashon yachid. This, that according to benegei, to the majority or a nation, we use an expression of Rabbim or lashon yachid. So this is when it refers to a pu'ula, an action. So I could use a singular verb in a situation with two possibilities. When the majority does the action, the same action equally, so when everyone is doing when all the members of the group perform the action the same way equally, so then you could use a expression, a verb of lashon yachid, because they're all performing the same action. Und wenn die Pu'ula werden getan bei Fanim Rabim durch verschiedene Menschen von der Kvutze Volk werden gesagt lashon Rabim, in der Ton dem an ihnen, was soll sei ma'ache sie als ein Klau. Now, when an action is performed in multiple ways by various members of the group or nation, then lashon Rabim is used. Why? Since the parties have nothing in common to unite them as one. So basically, the Rebbe explained like this: when members of a group are doing the same action, we're all doing the same thing together. We're all pulling the table. So you could use a lashon yachid. But when you have the same group and they're doing different actions, so then you use a lashon Rabim. So he explains what that means. So that's all in regards to an action. Everyone's doing the same action together, I use a lashon yachid. Everyone's together but doing different actions at the same time, lashon Rabim. But when it comes to a feeling, when it comes to the feeling or thought of a group, so then was in them is doch in de same and the same shavis. So Samol and I found him Rabim. Damals wird gesagt lashon Rabim. However, when it comes to a feeling, we know thoughts and feelings are dissimilar, since feelings and thoughts are always expressed in multiple ways. So therefore, I use the expression lashon Rabim. So now the Rebbe says, therefore, the Rebbe is nit kein to of was mir gefindt. It's not a wonder what we find. As benegeden klar von Volk wo nutzt der Pasuk bei der Lashonis. That when it comes to the expression, when it comes to the speaking about the collective nation, I could use a lashon of Rabim. Again, the meat is nit kein to me of was mir gefindt. As benegeden klar von Volk wo nutzt der Pasuk bei der Lashonis. Sei lashon Rabim, sei lashon Yachid, und lefam ma viele beiden in Pasuk. So it's not. You can't ask a question. Sometimes when we speak about Klal Yisrael, we use Lashon Yachid. Sometimes we use Lashon Rabim. It's normal. When there's an action, everyone's doing together, Lashon Yachid. When there's an action, but everyone's doing it separately, Lashon Rabim. But a feeling, when it comes to an emotion, that you use Lashon Rabim because everybody feels and takes in what they saw differently. And gives an example. Like we find in our parsha, in the pasuk, the people saw Vayar, Lashon Yachid, they saw Vayanu, and they trembled, Vayamdu Mirachik, and they stood from afar. Sorry, I skipped. Again, it says the people, Vayar, Yisrael saw the great hand, Vayiru and they feared, Vayamin, and they believed. So Vayar from the Yidden was meant to the Iyakipshuti. So Vayar, they saw. Who's they saw? The Yidden saw. They saw what Hashem did in Mitzrayim. And they all given gleich in them, so they were all equal. Their fire is Vayar, Lashon Yachid. So why is he using, it should have said Vayiru. Why does it say Vayiru Hashem? Why does it say Vayar Hashem? They feared. Because they all saw together. It was a pu'ula, it's an action. All the Yidden, Vayar saw. Makes sense. But when it came to the actual Vayiru that they feared, and Vayaminu that they believed, which is an emotion, so for sure there was many different levels. And them is given Vayiru, Vayaminu, Lashon. So each person revered and believed in Hashem differently. The Rabbi gives another example. Similarly, in our parsha, the people saw and trembled. They stood from afar. They all saw Hashem. So when it comes to when it comes to the actual action, the vision, they all saw it together. You can use Lashon Yachid. However, when it comes to the emotions, the feelings, that it depends on each person's the sensitivity and excitement. So therefore, Lashon Rabim is the correct way to use it. Fine. So now, with that explanation, we explain now the difference between the Egyptian unity and the Yidden's unity. We're going to see when Goyim get together how that works. Or the Mitzrayim. Well, in the pasuk Upari Hikra Yisro b'nei Yisrael Seneim v'hini Mitzrayim neisei achareim. And the pasuk that says Pari drew near, the Yidden raised their eyes, and behold, Egypt was neisei achareim, chasing after them. That Goshen nitayv neisei. So now, the emphasis is not on the act of chasing neisei, pu'ulas hanesia, which is the actual purpose, but what nor oiv achareim. The focus is not on chasing, but who were they chasing? After them. It was their mechuven anesia, as das aradif achareim was is verbunden mit vayahafich leiv pari va'avodav. Mit zer rishus and kavanas rois. So, the emphasis is not on the act of chasing, but on the purpose after them. Mitzrayim was pursuing them. In other words, it's related to what we said. Pari and his servants had a change of heart, which is relating to their wickedness and their evil intentions. So concerning these matters, not all the Egyptians were alike. And divas haben sie gebeten bei Pari, also Areislas and the Yidden from Mitzrayim hat doch lechere gedarf stehen, neisim Lashon Rabim. So concerning this, there's difference between Pari, the sorcerers of Pari, those who feared the word of Hashem, those who did not, especially those who requested Pari to release the Yidden from Egypt. So the pasuk, it makes sense to say, the pasuk should have said, V'hini Mitzrayim, right? Mitzrayim, Noisim, we're traveling after them, because over here we're not focusing on the stress is the achareim, after them, which why they chasing the Yidden, because they hate the Yidden. So in hate, there's different emotions. So the Chayra, Rashi's bothered. The Rebbe says, based on this, about an emotion, pasuk should have used V'hini Mitzrayim Noisim Achareim Lashon Rabim. Why use Lashon Nisei? So therefore Rashi says, you know why? When them are not alle, it's okay. Is Rashi mefarish mechadish believe echad keishachad. So therefore Rashi explains that here we're talking about it's a chiddush with one heart and as one man. It's adrab. Das was steht Nisei Lashon Yachid. You know why it says Nisei Lashon Yachid? Is their far was their Nisei is given acharem, because the reason they were chasing them was because it was after them. Noch Yog and the Yidden. Why were they chasing? Because it was the Jews. In them, Noch Yog and the Yidden is by they given. Nit wie me ken meinen as in them zijn given chilukim mitzad v'alderech die sugim shinim and now. There's an alle given leib echad. They all had the same feeling. Why were they pursuing the Yidden? All for the same thing, because they hated the Jews. Mit ein Hart was es full mit Sinne zu Yidden. With one heart, which is full of hate to the Jews. Und das hat Goyim given. So with the fact that they have the same common denominator, that they're all anti-Semites, they hate the Jews, so that cause is on zan ki shechad. In other words, could be the Egyptians hated each other, but they all, it's like the UN, they all got together for what purpose? Against the Jews. They all united together because it was the Jews, believe echad, because it was with one common denominator against the Jews, so therefore ki shechad. The far is they say they believe echad ki shechad. Now that Rabbi is going to explain in Zion, we'll do one more. Well, now we're going to explain in Zion the Jewish unity. Al derech says, move in Pasha Seinu. And then Pirish HaPasuk v'yikhan Shem Yisro naged Har, the beneged that etzem chaniya b'movanei Pasha von Eden is yenem ord is the Pasuk meidiyah frier v'yachan b'midbar. Was man sagen as das, was der Pasuk is meise v'yichan Shem Yisro naged Har, kum zum Mavar sein dem v'yachnu, zur Eifen achaniya and achana zu kabal zater, was they haben dort gedarf mekabel sein. So the Rebbe is saying is that in the same Pasuk using v'yachnu v'yichan is telling me how the v'yachnu was. You want to know how the Yidden's v'yachnu was? It was in a way of v'yichan. Stellt sich die Scheile, die achana nafshis und der Ratzin und achana zum Antere ist doch bei jedem Yidden gewähnt, wie madrigos im Matzav Aruchni. Every Yid felt emotionally his achana zum Antere was something different. Anders wie beim zweiten Yidden. Anheblich von Mesha Aaron, Nishim Skenim und andere verschiedene Darges bis zu alle Darges in Kotz Hasheni von Yidden, welche haben afilu noch ein Nest von Kiris Yamsa getan, da Yesh Hashem bekabene geht zu besetzen. So every Yid, his achana zum Antere was expressed differently, and his emotions and its excitement was differently. So based on this, on the emotion, it should have said Vayachanu Lashon Abim. Avon Rashi in his matik from the Pasuk Tiverter, so therefore Rashi explains Vayichan Sham Yisro. We asked, why does Rashi quote the word Yisro? Or Meniti Vartik Verter Negadar, as us main the Pasuk as Alts Yisro. San Al Yidin Given Ki Ishachad. You know why they were Ki Ishachad? Because they were Yidin. The Yidden, because the reason why they got together is because they were Yisro. Mit an Ichel von einem von zweiten. Und nicht mit sehr stehen, vielmehr hat der Gossem in der Achana V'Rotsen Egad der Hort zum Mekabel sein Tere. Die Achtas hat bei See Areis gerufen, als sie sollen sein Belewe, hat alle mit ein und demselben Rotsen Belewe zum Mekabel sein Tere. So we asked, why not say Vayachanu? It's about an emotion, because the Torah is telling me, you know how they encamped? They encamped, Vayachanu was in a way of Vayichan. Why were they Vayichan? How were they able to get together? Because they were Yisro. Because they were the Yidden, they were thinking, we're Klal Yisrael. It doesn't matter our differences. It doesn't matter we think differently. Our ideology is different. Our minhagim is different. It doesn't matter. We're Yisro. So because they were Yisro, that caused that it should be Ki Ishachad. Okay, tonight we'll continue.